What are you supposed to do if you are not supposed to exist? I am Rashayla Marie Brown, the R&B, and this is Rage to Master, a journey of creative genius, survival, and self-mastery. Please join me. Apologies to all the people in Lebanon by June Jordan. Dedicated to the 600,000 Palestinian men, women, and children who lived in Lebanon from 1948 through 1983. I didn't know, and nobody told me, and what could I do or say anyway? Yes, I did know it was the money I earned as a poet that paid for the bombs and the planes and the tanks that they used to massacre your family. But I am not an evil person. The people of my country aren't so bad. You can expect but oh so much from those of us who have to pay taxes and watch American TV. You see my point. I'm sorry. I really am sorry. Yo sorry ass. Sorry. Sorry. For me, as a traveling artist, I think about myself as a global citizen. Many artists, due to our work, must travel, and we think of ourselves as people who exist mostly with borders and without them. My Magyar ancestors probably couldn't imagine me as a visual artist traveling and experiencing the world mostly as a world without borders. My entire existence is bound up in forms of ethnocentric nationalism. This idea awakens me to the understanding of the conflicts and wars that have shaped my identity. That is the reason why I'm recording from Berlin today. I'm recording from Berlin in a studio and an artist residency and thinking a lot about the events that led to the war in Gaza. While many artists are boycotting Germany due to its response to the war and censorship of artists who speak out in support of Palestine, I have decided to come closer because this land was also part of an empire that I wish to understand. Because for me, this is about connecting the dots between what is happening today and what has been happening for the past several centuries. In this region, ethnocentric nationalism have shaped the borders that we see of the countries in Europe today. My ancestors fled Europe in an era when the Austro-Hungarian Empire was about to be divided into many, many pieces. This idea of ethnocentric nationalism is at the center of this discussion, and unfortunately, in our contemporary discussions, we often forget that this has happened before, and this is all interconnected. I would say that a lot of my own relatives have forgotten this. Many of my Hungarian-descended relatives are actually white nationalists. Some of them are actually thinking of themselves as religious conservatives, but that's also oversimplifying the story. The world of my ancestors was being dramatically shaped by the notion that an ethnic group must have its own nation in order to have a sense of security. We now know that this idea is false, and it has been tearing apart the region of Central Europe for decades, and it is something that we are still living through. And the question we must ask ourselves is, did it work for our ancestors, and is it working for us now? I'm a child of a teenage pregnancy, but that would be oversimplifying the story because unlike many teenagers in those circumstances, my mother chose to get pregnant. My mother is an adoptee who is also a child of an orphan. In my family, thinking a lot about reconnecting to your roots that you were severed from shame, racism, and ethnocentric nationalism is a huge part of how we look at the world. My mother is a child of Hungarian descent who is mixed race. There is so much shame that she has had to shed in order just to survive and be here. She is a testament to human survival, and so am I. This conversation about impossible existence is one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to my interlocutor today, Michael Rakowitz, one of the most art historically significant artists of our time.
Hey, Rashayla.
Hey, it's so good to see you.
It's great to see you. I've missed you a lot.
I know. I'm like, wow, this year is not what any of us expected at all. It's been quite a journey since that last quarter we were together. So
Yeah, for sure.
Michael, like me and my mother, is a person who is not supposed to exist. He is an Iraqi American Jew. This is a contradiction in terms for many people who wish to divide. A lot of his work that is most significant is about his identity as an Iraqi American Jew. We actually recorded this conversation 5 years ago at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this conversation is just as relevant then as it is today.
How's life going with you? I know you literally just got out of the critiques, right?
Yeah. No, it was a nice session today. Yeah, things are okay. I'm serving as director of graduate studies this quarter. So, there's a lot of work that I'm doing that I'm happy to do, but is also, the difficult work. The department really, I think, did not do the best job of continuing the momentum of the difficult discussion that we need to have about white supremacy culture in the department, and also about like restorative practices and how to actually deal with what was at hand. And nobody discussed the legacy of this beautiful class that you brought to us, and how to actually make it part of the core curriculum. And it's something that the graduates have insisted on, that they absolutely adored that class. And we need to offer it, and to make this kind of conversation not something that we move through, but that we return to all the time, because it's ongoing work. And it's important to not turn it into something that's just solved and moved through. It's part of like the legacy of why it is we even have in the institution that we have, that it exists.
I'm also really just very honored to be part of this platform that you're creating for our ecosystem. It's so important to be able to have access, and for people to be able to be able to do that, to be able to engage in that access with their true selves. And I think that one of the things you're pointing to with this whole purpose of this podcast is to let people know that they're not alone. I mean, even the teaching landscape now is so decimated as a result of COVID. And right now, I again foresee a time, when artists might take on a profession that is not what they necessarily want to do by day. But it enables them to actually follow through with the work that they feel strongly committed to at those times when they're not working, and this is the tragedy of capitalism. And I don't want to say that being trite, it seems like that's said now without people, even thinking what that means, but it is very true, But art has always been attached to power. And that's one of the big things that I felt I took away from art school, was that I was going to be only in it for 4 years and in a graduate program for 2 years. And then my job was to find those people, to make that community, wherever I was, whenever it was.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what kind of led us to each other as well, because I remember when I was on my first day teaching this class that I was invited to teach in ATP specifically. But when I was so nervous and I was running back and forth and I was trying to get copies of my syllabus and all these different things, I bumped into you in the hallway, and you were so warm, and you gave me a hug, and you just said, welcome, to our department. Thank you so much for teaching this class. And I was like, oh my God, like Michael Rakowitz is a cool ass human being. like just a real human. And that was really, really nice. And that happened just a couple minutes before I had to go into my classroom and kind of be human with a group of, humans I hadn't met before, who I also wanted to understand that me coming in to do any type of like fixing work or rescuing of an institution is not how we're going to get anything done here, that we have to all kind of show up and commit.
So I'm walking down the streets of Budapest, and today there's a marathon being run. And one of the things that I noticed is that the background music just contained a sample of Black Star and Common. This was that song that they did that was an underground deep cut. I'm trying to remember the title of it, but the beginning, I'm sure a lot of people know. Escúchela, la ciudad respirando. And it's about New York City. And it's about the city in general and the cold and the harshness of it. But I'm saying that all to say that oftentimes I've tried to articulate to Europeans of all different identities, whether they're Eastern, Western, whether they are Central, that Black American vocal presence is the background life for the background sound for their cultural spaces. So whether that's bars, hotels, and now at a marathon, clubs, all that stuff, it's Black American vocal presence. Even in a place like Hungary, who has a very violent history regarding the other and the outsider, and even in my own family, people who are overtly racist. And so there's a lot of cultural mashing together and a lack of awareness of actually how that voice is appearing in a particular cultural space. So for example, if I were to tell people at the marathon that their background music of Black Star with Mos Def's voice in the background is really about articulating the coldness and the harshness of a particular city environment, then maybe they'll understand why he's a perfect soundtrack for a group of people exhausting themselves running the city.
A lot of us are regional, that we're from the Middle East and we make work about it. Yeah. And that if they wanted to collect our work, well, we actually had leverage. We could say, sure, we'd love to work with you, but we want to make sure that the people that are building the museum are not having to participate in the kafala system, the system of basically indentured servitude and slave labor. I mean, it's a tricky thing, right? Like to be politically clear in your work and to then also want to survive off of that work, because then that means that you're dealing with a collecting class that somehow intersects with your beliefs.
In the months to come of this podcast, I am going to speak about the ways that the mind of an artist, specifically my undisciplinary process, is essential to looking forward in order to build a sense of collective and individual self-determination. I have to warn you, this podcast is not for you if you have already lost hope. This is for people who want to bring some sense of joy and dreaming back to their life again. People who identify in some ways as gifted. I am a survivor of post-traumatic stress disorder. Many people don't really understand PTSD, but anybody who's experienced a life-threatening event may experience the symptoms of flashbacks, avoidance, nightmares. We are living through a collective flashback. We have been repeatedly traumatized throughout centuries, and we haven't dealt with that trauma, which is why we are living through it again. To get to the other side, we have to have no shame, which means we have to shed our shame and actually process and go through it. In order to go through it, we have to not lose hope. And to not lose hope, we must connect with each other. Human connection is the healer of a trauma. In order to make the world that we want, we must process the past and not relive the mistakes of our ancestors. What does it mean to cross the line of love and hate and recognize our collective humanity. And as you listen to this conversation between Michael and I, we are speaking about things that may feel familiar, and you may ask yourself, have we been here before?
So I really want to get into this idea of talking about specifically what it means to have integrity within the community, but also like within oneself.
Sure.
And so I'm just curious, like, what your personal definition of integrity is. And in the line of like thinking about the thin line, which is the title of the podcast, do you think there is a such thing as a thin line between integrity and something that might be perceived as being too rigid or dogmatic? I think a lot about people's criticisms, for example, of the idea of like calling people out, calling systems out, calling institutions out, calling people out who you feel maybe causing harm or doing something that you believe is like morally reprehensible or whatever the case may be. So I'm just curious, like, how do you define that for yourself, and how do you navigate that within your own self as an artist, but also like within the larger community of artists as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I also I love the title of the podcast because I do think that it shows just how much things do overlap and are not so easily separatable one from the other. Well, I'm not so interested in calling out. I mean, I live in a world where I recognize just how much we participate in, systems of damage and oppression, consciously and unconsciously. It's one of the real tragedies, I think, of being alive in a lot of ways. But, also, I think that I try to make work in the work that I do, I try to make work in a way that isn't just so simple as, say, sloganeering or anything. And, when an interesting example of this is what happened during the Whitney Biennial in 2019, when I made the decision not to participate. But it was a decision that I made, and I talk about this a lot. And sometimes I don't know exactly how everyone reacts to it, but like it tends to get buried sometimes, But like I made that decision not to participate in solidarity with one of the curators of that biennial, who I respected. I continue to respect them both a great deal, but Rujeko Hockley is a curator whose work I'd been studying, or not studying, but following.
Got some amazing shows under her belt.
She's an amazing, amazing curator. And both she and Jane are incredibly smart. And I was really excited to work with both of them. But, a few weeks after being given the exciting news that I was being asked to be in their show, the news broke about the tear gas that was used at the southern border being connected to Safariland, which was a company that was owned by the vice president of the board, Warren Kanders. And the miracle that happened from this was that, all of this, for me, really began when the staff responded to that report by writing a letter to the director. And I thought this was actually a very beautiful letter. And it was signed by 105 people in the museum. And that was it was a complete representation of the museum. So front-facing staff and then senior curators, all of it. And it gave me so much hope. And the director's response was, polite, but woefully inadequate, just more or less saying that, the request that was in the letter, which was to ask for a meeting and talk about why somebody was on the board and was in charge of making this thing that affected their communities, the workers' communities where they came from, whether it was tear gas used in Ferguson, or if it was used at the southern border of the United States, or if it was used in Palestine, or if it was used in Gezi during the protests in Istanbul, all these people just more or less said that we're making a we statement, but we're also making I statements within that same letter, that we come from those places. Artwork gets made about these things, but we come from these places. Right. And I was so moved by that. And when it was clear that the director wasn't going to be making any radical adjustments, I reached out to Rujeko and to Jane and said, listen, like, what can we do as artists to help exert pressure? Have any artists actually offered to withhold their work? But we made a stand. And so I offered that to Rujeko and to Jane as a possibility, and they seemed astonished that this would even be thought of. And they said, well, listen, you can make work about it if you want, but like, we still want to do the show that we want to do. And I thought about it for a while, and I started to think, I'm not going to make a call out work. I'm not going to make a work about Warren Kanders in Safariland at the museum. Like,
I think that's what most people would think to do. They're like, oh, I can make this into a moment to do something like within that framework, right, as opposed to abstaining or removing oneself.
And I just thought, when I make my decisions about things, I bring all myself into that decision. But in this case, I also felt like I was bringing all my people potentially into the exhibition, and that I could not afford to have their voices co-opted, So I wrote a private note, a private letter to Rujeko and to Jane saying, listen, I can't do this, and here are the reasons, and it was something that I felt also, again, saying what I said to you earlier, I would like to do whatever I can in my time here on this planet and in this field to make it so that other artists don't have to grapple with this, to make it so that they don't compromise their positions. I mean, there's a fight in there that I've become very, connected to. It got me to think about it. Like, the question of integrity. There should be best practices about funding. There should be. Like, there's best practices about the exhibition of artwork. And one of the things that I said at the time in relation to integrity was that, like, you would not compromise the integrity of a work on paper, for instance, by showing it in unsafe conditions. So why would you compromise the integrity of an artist or their work and ask them to show in conditions where to show in a place where conditions are made unsafe for others, or with funding, from people who are making conditions unsafe for others?
So I do have like a certain amount of autonomy and ability to kind of like really defend myself against these, what I would perceive as excessive demands, or putting my work in like those precarious or, kind of unsafe conditions. So I was wondering, as you talk about integrity and how you are kind of thinking of your work as a way to make sure that other artists don't have to deal with those things, I'm curious if that felt like something that you developed over time, or have you from the outset of being an artist known that that was something that was really important to you? Or is it becoming more established and being able to tell people like, no, I won't do that, but people really care and they want to hear, well, why did Michael Rakowitz not want to, like they're interested in why you specifically might not want to participate in something and may ask you those questions. And even as you mentioned before, maybe a younger or, a starting out artist, emerging artist who doesn't have a certain kind of standing in the art world might not know or feel that they can do that. So I'm just curious, like, did you come to that over time? Were there any instrumental experiences that you had that pushed you to that? Or if you really felt like you always were going to be committed to that from day one?
Yeah, those are great questions. Well, first, let me start out with something that you've internalized for yourself, where you said that you don't have that work on the level of a Whitney Biennial, and you certainly do. I mean, this is one of those things that's very important, actually, to say that, like, these are great exhibitions. They're real. It's a great place to discover artwork, and it's a really wonderful institution. But ultimately, we also need to know that, like, there's so much exclusion that still exists. And if I think about the way that, like, the long body, that is one's career, as it develops, you start to think, well, am I actually, is there something kind of pathological that's happening if I'm making work about this and then I'm showing it institutions that are making all of that happen, right? And so I think it's something that was seeded in the work, because of my interests, that I was willing to make work that dealt with politics and activism. But I also think that, like, that's my work. That's not somebody else's work. Everybody should be doing the work that they want to do from their own frames of reference. And I don't want to prescribe people with having to care about that stuff. Absolutely not. I mean, there's room for everything in art, And so, I had it seeded in my work, but I think that where I am right now is taking stock of the fact that, like, yes, a lot of those things that I've been able to do in my career have been actually accommodated by, some entanglements with funding that do not reflect what it is that I want to put out into the world. And I can be more choiceful about that now.
Right.
But and I think it's important to just be self-aware about that.
Yeah.
But again, my friend M. Carmen Lane has said this, and I'm going to paraphrase something they've said, where they said that in their work, they're keenly aware that they're building a world that they will not live to see, that they're hopefully building something, that is better, but that they probably won't live to see it. And that's the commitment that I feel, is that if I take stock of that moment that occurred around the Whitney, and what I learned also from my engagement with PS1 MoMA, that this is not specific to those museums. It's a disease everywhere, that we see, especially in the North American context of cultural institutions. And why would I want all of these artists, that I'm working with, and the ones that will come after, to have to take on those same kinds of entanglements? I want to help disentangle, and so I think that's kind of, one of the things that's involved in, questions around integrity, that it actually comes from the Latin of, integer, meaning to keep intact, and if I just think about the care that we give to objects and materials and the desire for restoration, then why can't that kind of same restorative practice be visited on, the communities that these museums say that they're beholden to? I mean, the wonderful moment, to behold right now is the momentum that's been built, and we've watched it happen together, since March, and then in May, after the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many others, that museums have been the recipients of these open letters, saying that the way that you treat, people of color and Black people in your staff is unacceptable, and it's reprehensible, and this needs to be dismantled.
Yeah.
I've been struggling with that open letter thing, actually, to be honest. I think what I'm loving as I'm hearing you talk is that there's a certain kind of commitment to what is important to you, but you're not prescribing or scripting what you think other people should be doing. I don't know. That's something I'm thinking a lot about, because I remember when those, letters first came out, and it was so many of them, and I was invited to sign my name on no less than 5. And I, would generously just offer my name, be like, yeah, whatever y'all need, cool, just put my name on it. And then getting to a point where I was like, we're not going to open letter our way out of this. We're not going to have the institution accept our demands, and then we all get the success that we think we deserve and desire, and we can obliterate racism and sexism and all the different things that keep us from that. I really do think that it comes down to kind of like that other side of what you're saying, which isn't so much about prescribing, demanding, even though that is important to a lot of people, especially in collective work, but really about that kind of knowing what you want to do and what you want to stand for, and kind of what role you want to play within, or what role you're not going to play within the larger conversation.
No, for sure. Absolutely. And we need to be willing to engage in those conversations. You know, if we ask for the conversation to happen, we have to be prepared to arrive. And so that's what I believe in very strongly, is that it can't just be the complaint or the indictment. You know, we're artists, you know, and I think that one of the things that we try to do is to participate in an intersection of problem solving and troublemaking, you know, problematizing the problem, and to making sure that we provoke, because the work that gets done and through the provocation, that's the real social, you know, engagement of it. That's the real relational stuff, you know, that like we're able to kind of like see how systems work when we truly, you know, put those kinds of expository agents into the system. Like whatever act gets made, you know, you start to see how power works. And so that to me is, you know, that to me is like what we need to do collectively. You know, like what is the learning, you know, from this moment? You know, the learning from the moment is that like there needs to be an abolition of policing. You know, like that's unquestionable as far as I'm concerned, you know, and it's very disappointing to hear that Obama pushed back on that today, but I guess it's also not surprising.
Nah, that's part of that's not surprising to me. And that's part of where I'm like, let me find allies that are interested in what I'm interested in, not based off of identity politics. Because I can't assume that all black people be successful. I can't make that assumption anymore. And it's actually being around a lot of very powerful Black people that I see that that's really not the case for a lot of people of color. Right. So I think now working in community has shifted for me through even this like past year and through this pandemic. So I do want to say, and kind of wrapping this all up, that idea of solidarity within you know, groups of people or identities that I never would like necessarily align or think to align myself with is a big thing that I'm starting to ask questions about this year, because I've seen so many public figures, celebrities, politicians, people who I respect, who are very, very influential, not say anything about what's happening with people not having access to healthcare, without people having access to, you know, living in a safe neighborhood. And I mean that for people, you know, Black people, people of color, and continuing to make money off of those exact same groups of people. So that's something that I've really been thinking about as it pertains to creative industries, pop culture, visual artists, like the people who make our culture, not speaking about the issues that face the people that make them money, and really being able to look more broadly for those pockets of folks who are committed to that, whether they may or may not immediately look like the community that I have identified with my entire life, you know?
Absolutely. Right. Nothing is monolithic, right? You know, like we need to understand, you know, that eventually when we talk about race, it's also going to intersect with class. And that's one of the things that we need to, you know, we need to talk about it. We need to, you know, kick the rust off of the conversations that I know that we're capable to have around these things, you know, because there is a lack, I think, of people's ability to put it to language all the time. You know, we feel it in our bodies and we know how bad it feels, right? But we need to know that that I feel bad, you know, and you feel bad, and we feel bad in different ways, right? But we can actually find moments of connection through that bridge of experience, and also to realize that like these are not single issues. You know, again, it's like it's such a an oft-quoted thing, but like when Audre Lorde says, you know, there's no single issues because we don't live single issue lives, it's very true. Those are the kinds of solidarities that I'm very excited about, you know, is listening to each other and being able to move forward in ways that are taking account of our relationship, you know, each of our own relationship to those different moments of precarity and urgency.
Right. Well, again, thank you for that. And also thank you for reminding me that I am somebody, even though I haven't been in the Whitney.
Oh my God, you know, and I'll never be in the Whitney, you know, so, and I've got to believe I'm somebody, right?
Thank you again so much, Michael. It was really a pleasure to talk to you and to see your face on Zoom.
You too. I can't wait to collaborate again. We're going to find an opportunity to do so. Love to you and yours, and blessings to your family.
On the body. Insert picture of Arab man in passenger seat and black woman driving a Jeep, and Michael Jackson playing on the radio with a caption that says, Michael Jackson sings Mama Say, Mama Sa, Mama Kusa. They are debating the merits and pitfalls of the social construct of the nation state. He is pro. She is con. She has read Hegel and owns a house. He has dual citizenship and has flown airplanes. They jumped out of an airplane together. She told her father, who was proud. Her father reminisced on his time in the Gulf War. When she got off the phone, they agreed it was good that her father was in his right mind, considering the circumstances. Insert picture here. A picture is worth 1,000 words. On the mind. The windows would not roll down. She passed gas. Everyone in the taxi smelled it, but said nothing to be polite. She admitted, "It was me." Her companion laughed and taught her the word for crazy in Alfusa. Majnoona. J'ai besoin de toi, mais je ne t'aime pas. Maybe I was brought into your life only to help you to start lifting weights or quit smoking. My gift will arrive in 50 years when you are still alive and well. Think of me then, s'il vous plaît. We will not say the gift arrived late. I will send the text now. Happy belated birthday. My favorite place is the beach where we met, and the desert where nomads live. The poetry of that is so easy. The stars and the planets hang high for you, but they decorate my pool on lazy nights. I swim in a remembrance haze as thick as New Orleans swamp air that drips from your neck to her knees to my neck. I live above everyone else, including you, and blame the cloud silk for alienating me. I swim in a remembrance haze. Insert images of your face that I will never see again, but at the time I don't know it yet. It is unceremonious. You dropped me off at the Dubai Mall and gave me a quick kiss because 1, PDA makes you uncomfortable, and 2, you don't know how to say goodbye. On the road. Sortir, voyage, aller. He sold the car she drove in Abu Dhabi. She threw away the shoes he wore in Chicago. He has to get behind the wheel. She has to walk in somebody else's shoes. He has to get back behind the... She has to walk in someone else's. Get back behind the... Walk a mile in someone else's. Why Alfusa? Why not Espanol or Francais? The implication, why do you care about Arabs? I don't want to hate anyone, but this question makes me hate you. Comment dit-on? I don't want to hate you en arabe. Comment dit-on? I don't want to hate you en arabe. Comment dit-on? Colonization en français. Colonisation. You believe in being polite and being good to others. Capricorn Sun, Virgo Moon. I believe in telling the truth and being good to myself. Virgo Sun, Pisces Moon. We are both Libra rising, beautiful on the outside, needing constant affirmation of this fact. There was a man following her. She could not prove it, but she could feel his eyes. She began to run in somebody else's shoes. Times like these, she wished she wore her hijab or at least her habaya. But then, I don't believe in gender, and I don't care if you think that a street has one. Oh, Dustin. The escalator at the airport moved very slowly, but the bags were much too heavy to carry. They floated alongside the stairs, and when they reached for their necklace, they realized the Africa pendant was gone. By then, they were already at the bottom of the stairs and could not go back. This reminded them of the time someone asked if they were married for the first of 3 times that day, and they could not translate the funny retort they always gave to gendered and oppressive questions. I like my freedom. However, they had 2 more opportunities to respond that day, and they remembered the witty retort on the 3rd incident and felt proud that they were able to defend themselves against binaries. In any case, the plane was going to leave in 60 minutes and there was no time to look for the pendant. They had to let it go. There is no need to hold on to a cheap small symbol that costs 50 dirhams, but still. Inshallah. Ojalá. Oshallah. I hope that you find it one day. Ojalá all your dreams come true. Oshallah, your will finds its way to God's. I hope the Holy Spirit of the staircase makes you laugh and not only retrace where you went wrong. I hope your future is as bright as Venus and Mars. I hope the planets that made your personality do not control your destiny. Shine. I hope you try to be in the present tense and never in the past, if God wills it. I hope God wills, inshallah, un jour, one day.